That Friday night at 9:30, I discovered my supervisor stealing confidential client data and selling it to our biggest competitors while systematically doctoring quarterly reports. I watched Marcus manipulate financial projections on his computer screen, realizing our investors were being defrauded out of millions. When I confronted him, he laughed coldly and revealed that CEO Jonathan already knew about the scheme and profited directly from it. Standing there in our empty office, I realized I was trapped in corporate corruption that reached the very top with my career hanging by a thread. My name is Freddie, and I had worked as a senior financial analyst at Nexus Tech Solutions for 3 years. The company felt like home to me. I believed in our mission to revolutionize small business software, and I trusted that our leadership valued integrity above profit. That trust shattered completely in the span of 72 hours. After discovering Marcus transferring client databases to external drives and falsifying revenue projections, I spent 2 sleepless nights collecting evidence. I screenshot email chains showing unauthorized data transfers. I recorded conversations using my phone when Marcus bragged about selling competitor intelligence. I documented every discrepancy in our quarterly financials, noting how projected earnings had been inflated by 37% through creative accounting tricks. My hands trembled as I organized the evidence into a comprehensive presentation. I genuinely believed the system would protect employees who reported wrongdoing. Every corporate training session had emphasized our open-door policy and commitment to ethical business practices. The employee handbook specifically outlined protections for whistleblowers and encouraged reporting misconduct directly to senior leadership. On Wednesday morning, I requested a private meeting with CEO Jonathan Bradley. His assistant Emma scheduled me for Thursday at 3 o'clock. I rehearsed my presentation repeatedly, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Jonathan had always seemed approachable during company meetings, emphasizing transparency and accountability as core company values. Thursday afternoon arrived with unusual warmth for October in Denver. I climbed the stairs to the executive floor, my portfolio, containing printed evidence and backup drives. Jonathan's corner office overlooked the downtown skyline, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the space feel expansive and welcoming. Jonathan greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine smile. He was 42 years old, tall and athletic with graying temples that gave him a distinguished appearance. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, and his office displayed awards recognizing his contributions to Colorado's technology sector. "Freddie, please sit down. Emma mentioned you had concerns about some operational issues. I appreciate you bringing them directly to me rather than letting rumors spread through the office." I opened my portfolio and began presenting the evidence systematically. Jonathan listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding of the financial implications. He took notes on a legal pad, nodding seriously, as I explained how Marcus had been manipulating client contracts and revenue recognition. "This is deeply troubling," Jonathan said after I finished. "Marcus came highly recommended when we hired him 18 months ago, but these allegations suggest serious ethical violations. I want you to know that bringing this forward took courage, and it reflects the integrity we value in our employees." Jonathan promised a thorough investigation within 1 week. He assured me that my job was completely secure and that the company would take appropriate action regardless of Marcus's position. He thanked me for my diligence and asked me to keep the matter confidential while HR conducted their review. Walking back to my desk, I felt relieved and proud. I had done the right thing, and leadership would handle the situation appropriately. Marcus was away from the office that afternoon, attending a client meeting in Colorado Springs. I completed my regular analysis work and left at 5:30 feeling optimistic about the outcome. Friday morning began normally. I arrived at 7:45, started my computer, and began reviewing overnight market reports. My routine included checking email updating financial models and preparing for the weekly team meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock. Nothing seemed unusual until 8:15, when I noticed my access badge wasn't working at the secured file room. I walked to the reception desk assuming my badge needed reprogramming. Security guard Harold was discussing something quietly with the front desk receptionist. When they saw me approaching, their conversation stopped abruptly. Harold looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. "Miss Thompson, you need to report to Human Resources immediately," the receptionist said with an expression I couldn't interpret. My stomach dropped. I took the elevator to the second floor where HR Director Patricia Williams was waiting in the conference room with a security officer I didn't recognize. Patricia was 48 years old, a consummate professional who had always been friendly during our previous interactions. Today her demeanor was formal and cold. "Freddie, please have a seat. We need to discuss some serious performance issues that have come to our attention." "Performance issues I don't understand. My last review was excellent and all my projects are on schedule." Patricia opened a thick file folder containing documents I had never seen before. She began reading from what appeared to be incident reports describing insubordination, unprofessional behavior, and conflicts with team members. The reports were dated throughout the previous 6 months and included detailed descriptions of events that had never occurred. "These behavioral issues have created a hostile work environment. Several team members have expressed concerns about your attitude and your tendency to undermine Marcus's authority. Yesterday's meeting with Mr. Bradley was the final incident that forced us to take action." I stared at her in disbelief. "Patricia, none of those incidents happened. I never had conflicts with my teammates, and I certainly never undermined Marcus. The meeting with Jonathan was about reporting Marcus's misconduct, not creating problems. I understand this is difficult to accept, but we have documentation from multiple sources. Your termination is effective immediately for disrupting team unity and creating workplace discord. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." The security officer stepped forward with a cardboard box. My mind was reeling as I tried to process what was happening. Through the conference room window, I could see Marcus, sitting at his desk watching the proceedings with a satisfied smirk. He raised his coffee mug in a mock toast when our eyes met. "This is retaliation for reporting misconduct," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "You can't terminate someone for whistleblowing. There are legal protections against this exact situation." Patricia's expression didn't change. "Your termination is based on documented performance issues that have nothing to do with any allegations you may have made. All decisions were made following proper HR procedures and company policy." The security escort to my desk felt like a public humiliation. My colleagues watched in stunned silence as I packed my personal items into the cardboard box. 3 years of work relationships, inside jokes, and shared projects ended in 10 minutes of awkward silence. Sarah from accounting looked like she wanted to say something, but she stayed quiet when the security officer glanced in her direction. As we walked toward the elevator, I could see Jonathan's office door was closed. His assistant Emma gave me a sympathetic look but said nothing. The security officer held the elevator door as I stepped inside, my career and financial stability disappearing as the doors closed. Standing in the parking lot beside my Honda Civic, I realized that Jonathan had never intended to investigate Marcus. He had called Marcus immediately after our meeting, giving him time to destroy evidence and fabricate the performance issues that justified my termination. The system I trusted to protect honest employees had been designed to silence them instead. The following Monday morning, I called in sick to a job I no longer had, then spent the day researching employment attorneys and government agencies that handle workplace retaliation cases. My savings account contained $4,200, enough to cover rent and expenses for approximately 6 weeks. The unemployment office would require documentation of my termination, but I suspected Nexus Tech had prepared to challenge any benefits claims. Tuesday afternoon, my former colleague, Sarah Martinez, called my personal cell phone. Sarah worked in accounts receivable and had been one of my closest friends at the company. She was nervous and speaking quietly, obviously calling from somewhere private. "Freddie, I can't talk long, but you need to know what happened after you left Friday. Jonathan called Marcus into his office within 20 minutes of your security escort. I was delivering invoices to the executive floor and heard them laughing together about the problem employee situation." Sarah explained that Marcus had spent the weekend deleting files from his computer and cleaning out his desk drawers. On Monday morning, he arrived early and held individual meetings with each team member, asking them to sign statements about my alleged behavioral problems. Most employees refused, but a few newer hires were pressured into providing written complaints. Marcus told everyone that you had been spreading false rumors about him and trying to damage his reputation with upper management. He said Jonathan gave you multiple warnings about workplace gossiping and unprofessional conduct, but you refused to change your behavior. The carefully constructed narrative was designed to make my misconduct allegations seem like personal revenge rather than legitimate whistleblowing. Marcus had positioned himself as the victim of a disgruntled employee who couldn't accept his authority. Jonathan provided credibility by backing Marcus's version of events and producing the fabricated performance reviews. "Sarah, those performance reviews are completely false. I never received any warnings or negative feedback. My last annual review was rated exceeds expectations in every category." "I know that, and so does everyone who actually works with you. But the people making decisions don't care about the truth. They care about protecting the company from legal liability and maintaining their profitable operations." Sarah revealed additional information that made my stomach sink further. She had overheard Patricia on a phone call with the company's legal department discussing strategies for defending against potential wrongful termination lawsuits. The attorneys had advised creating extensive documentation of performance issues and ensuring that any misconduct allegations appeared to be part of a pattern of workplace problems. Patricia seemed really uncomfortable during that call. "I think she knows this whole thing is wrong, but she's not willing to risk her own job to help you." That evening, I began investigating Marcus's background more thoroughly. His LinkedIn profile showed previous positions at 3 different technology companies over the past 8 years. Each position ended after approximately 18 to 24 months, which seemed unusual for someone with his apparent qualifications and experience. I contacted employees from his previous companies through LinkedIn and professional networking groups. The conversations were revealing and disturbing. Marcus had left his previous position at Dataflow Systems under suspicious circumstances involving missing client files and unexplained financial discrepancies. The company chose not to pursue criminal charges in exchange for his quiet resignation and agreement not to discuss internal operations. Before Dataflow, Marcus worked at Innovative Solutions Group, where he was allegedly involved in selling proprietary software code to competitors. Again, the company avoided public scandal by allowing him to resign without admitting wrongdoing. The pattern suggested that Marcus was skilled at corporate espionage and financial manipulation, moving between companies before his schemes were fully exposed. Wednesday morning brought the most shocking revelation yet. I received an unexpected phone call from Janet Coleman, a former executive assistant at Innovative Solutions Group. Janet had seen my LinkedIn outreach efforts and wanted to share information that she felt was important. Marcus didn't just steal information at our company. He was working directly with Jonathan Bradley, who was a consultant for us at the time. They were college roommates at University of Colorado, and they had been running similar schemes at multiple companies over the past decade. Janet explained that Jonathan would position himself as an external consultant, while Marcus got hired as an internal employee. Together, they would identify valuable intellectual property client databases and financial information that could be sold to competitors or used for fraudulent investment schemes. Jonathan's consulting contracts provided legitimate access to confidential information, while Marcus's employee status gave him ongoing access to internal systems. They've stolen millions of dollars from investors and bankrupted at least 3 smaller companies by selling their trade secrets to larger competitors. Jonathan always manages to leave his consulting contracts just before problems are discovered, and Marcus moves on to another company where Jonathan can eventually place him. The scope of their criminal enterprise was staggering. Janet estimated that they had defrauded investors of over $2 million while destroying the competitive advantages of numerous small technology companies. Their victims included not only investors, but also hundreds of employees who lost their jobs when companies failed due to stolen intellectual property. "Why didn't anyone report this to law enforcement?" I asked. "Several people tried, but Jonathan has connections throughout the business community and legal system. He went to law school before switching to business consulting, and he maintains relationships with prosecutors, judges, and regulatory officials. Complaints tend to disappear or get assigned to investigators who are friendly to his interests." Janet's information explained why Jonathan had seemed so confident during our meeting. He wasn't concerned about my allegations because he had successfully covered up similar situations multiple times before. The system was designed to protect him, and employees like me were simply obstacles to be removed efficiently and quietly. That night I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own job or reputation. Marcus and Jonathan were continuing their criminal enterprise at Nexus Tech, stealing from investors and preparing to destroy another company when their schemes became too risky to maintain. Current employees, clients, and investors were all potential victims of an ongoing conspiracy that had been operating successfully for over a decade. The weight of this knowledge was overwhelming. I wasn't equipped to take on a sophisticated criminal organization with legal and political connections. My evidence was strong, but my resources were limited, and my credibility had been systematically destroyed through their retaliation strategy. Fighting back seemed impossible, but allowing them to continue seemed morally unacceptable. Thursday morning, I filed formal complaints with 3 government agencies: the Securities and Exchange Commission for investor fraud, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for wrongful termination, and the Colorado Department of Labor for workplace retaliation. Each agency required detailed documentation, witness statements, and evidence supporting my allegations. The SEC assigned my case to investigator Robert Chen, who seemed genuinely interested in the financial fraud allegations. He scheduled a phone interview for the following week and requested copies of all financial documents showing revenue manipulation and investor misrepresentation. His initial questions demonstrated familiarity with corporate fraud schemes and suggested that my case would receive serious attention. EEOC investigator Linda Morrison was equally encouraging during our initial meeting. She reviewed the timeline of my misconduct report and subsequent termination, noting that the sequence of events clearly suggested retaliation. She explained that employers are prohibited from retaliating against employees who report illegal activities in good faith, even if the allegations are ultimately unproven. "Your case has several strong elements," Linda said. "The timing between your report and termination is very suspicious, and the sudden appearance of performance issues after 3 years of positive reviews suggests fabricated documentation. We'll interview your former colleagues and review all personnel records." The Colorado Department of Labor assigned my case to investigator Mike Thompson, who handled workplace retaliation and wrongful termination complaints. He was optimistic about my prospects for unemployment benefits and potential civil remedies, explaining that Colorado has strong protections for employees who report corporate misconduct. For 2 weeks, I felt hopeful that the system would work properly. The investigators seemed competent and committed to uncovering the truth. I spent my days organizing evidence, preparing witness lists, and researching legal precedents that supported my case. My savings account was depleting quickly, but I believed justice would prevail within a reasonable time frame. Then the delays began. Robert Chen called to reschedule our interview twice, citing unexpected priorities with other cases. When we finally spoke 3 weeks later, his tone had changed significantly. He asked fewer detailed questions and seemed more interested in potential challenges with my evidence than in pursuing the investigation aggressively. "Corporate fraud cases are extremely difficult to prosecute," he explained. "We need overwhelming evidence to convince prosecutors that criminal charges are warranted, and we have to be certain that whistleblower retaliation claims won't complicate the financial fraud investigation." Linda Morrison's follow-up meeting was similarly disappointing. She reported that several of my former colleagues had declined to provide statements supporting my version of events. Patricia from Human Resources had provided extensive documentation of my alleged performance problems, and Marcus had submitted a detailed complaint about my unprofessional behavior and workplace disruption. Without supporting testimony from other employees, retaliation cases become very difficult to prove, Linda said. Companies always claim that terminations are based on legitimate performance issues, and proving otherwise requires witness testimony or internal documents that contradict their narrative. Mike Thompson delivered the most devastating news. My unemployment benefits application had been denied based on Nexus Tech's claim that I was terminated for misconduct. The company provided documentation showing that I had violated workplace policies and created a hostile work environment through inappropriate behavior toward supervisors and colleagues. "You have the right to appeal this decision, but the process takes several months, and companies usually win these disputes because they control the documentation," Mike explained. "Unless you have strong evidence contradicting their claims, the appeal is unlikely to succeed." By the end of October, my savings account was nearly depleted. Rent for my one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill was $1,400 per month, plus utilities and basic living expenses. I had been searching for new employment aggressively, but the technology sector in Denver was surprisingly small, and word of my termination had spread quickly through professional networks. Job interviews initially went well until potential employers contacted Nexus Tech for references. Marcus and Jonathan had prepared careful responses that raised questions about my professionalism and reliability without making explicit accusations that could create legal liability. They described me as a talented analyst who unfortunately had difficulty accepting feedback and working collaboratively with supervisors and teammates. The reference checks were devastating because they contained enough truth to seem credible while omitting crucial context about the misconduct I had reported. Potential employers heard that I had been terminated for performance issues after conflicts with my supervisor, but they didn't learn about the financial fraud and corporate espionage that prompted my complaints. By early November, my credit cards were approaching their limits, and I faced the humiliating prospect of asking my parents for financial help. I had been so proud of my independence and professional success, but now I was unemployed, nearly broke, and apparently unemployable within my chosen career field. The breaking point came during what I thought was a promising job interview at Colorado Financial Services. I had made it through 3 rounds of interviews and seemed to be the preferred candidate for a senior analyst position. The hiring manager called Friday afternoon to inform me that they were withdrawing their job offer based on concerns raised during the reference check process. "I'm sorry, Freddie, but we received some troubling information about workplace conflicts and professional behavior issues. We can't afford to hire someone who might disrupt our team dynamics or create problems with supervisors." That afternoon, I was having coffee at a small cafe near the Colorado State Capitol when I overheard a conversation at the table behind me. 2 men in expensive suits were discussing legal strategies for containing employment disputes and protecting corporate clients from wrongful termination lawsuits. "The Bradley retainer has been very profitable this year," one lawyer said. "They've had us handle several employee problems, and we've been successful in minimizing their legal exposure every time." Jonathan knows how to handle these situations properly. Document everything, create legitimate justifications for personnel decisions, and maintain relationships with people who can influence regulatory outcomes. It's much cheaper than settling lawsuits or dealing with criminal investigations. I realized they were discussing Jonathan and the legal strategies being used to silence employees like me. The conversation confirmed Janet's warnings about Jonathan's connections within the legal system and his sophisticated approach to covering up criminal activities. They weren't just defending against my specific case. They were operating a comprehensive strategy for neutralizing any employee who threatened their operations. The lawyers continued discussing specific tactics for discrediting whistleblowers and delaying regulatory investigations. They mentioned paying $50,000 to have my professional reputation destroyed through false references and fabricated misconduct reports distributed to major employers throughout the Denver technology sector. They had systematically blacklisted me to prevent future employment while simultaneously portraying my allegations as the desperate accusations of a disgruntled former employee. Sitting in that coffee shop listening to lawyers casually discuss the destruction of my career and livelihood, I understood that I wasn't fighting individual bad actors. I was fighting an organized system designed to protect profitable criminal enterprises by silencing anyone who threatened their operations. The regulatory agency's legal system and professional networks had all been compromised or manipulated to ensure that justice would never be served through conventional channels. December brought the final collapse of my financial stability and professional prospects. My credit cards were maxed out, my apartment lease was expiring, and I had received 37 rejection letters from technology companies throughout Colorado, Utah, and Texas. The systematic character assassination had been devastatingly effective, making me unemployable throughout the regional technology sector. On December 15th, I loaded my belongings into a U-Haul truck and drove 8 hours to my childhood home in Dayton, Ohio. My parents, Robert and Susan Thompson, welcomed me with unconditional love and support, but I could see the worry in their eyes as they watched their daughter's dreams crumble in real time. My father was 63 years old, a retired factory worker who had spent 42 years building transmissions at General Motors. He was a practical man who believed in hard work, honesty, and treating people fairly. He had been so proud when I graduated from Ohio State with my finance degree and landed a good job in Colorado. Now he watched me unpack my professional clothes, knowing they might never be worn again. "Freddie, I don't understand how reporting criminals gets you punished instead of them," he said while helping me carry boxes to my childhood bedroom. In my day, companies fired people for stealing, not for reporting theft. My mother was 59 years old, a retired nurse who had dedicated her career to helping people heal from trauma and illness. She recognized the emotional devastation I was experiencing and tried to provide comfort while encouraging me to keep fighting for justice. But even her optimistic nature was challenged by the obvious corruption and systemic failures I described. "Honey, maybe you should focus on rebuilding your life instead of continuing to fight people who have more resources and connections than you do," she said gently. Sometimes walking away is the healthiest choice, even when you're right and they're wrong. The adjustment to living with my parents again at 28 years old was emotionally crushing. My old bedroom still contained posters from high school participation trophies from college activities and reminders of the ambitious young woman I had once been. I felt like a failure who had somehow deserved the professional destruction I experienced. I found part-time work at Macy's department store in the Dayton Mall, earning $11 per hour folding clothes, processing returns, and helping customers find merchandise. My finance degree and 3 years of professional experience were completely irrelevant to retail work, but the job provided basic income and health insurance while I tried to figure out my next steps. My former colleagues occasionally reached out through social media or text messages, usually to express sympathy or share workplace gossip. Sarah Martinez reported that Marcus had been promoted to Vice President of Operations with a significant salary increase and expanded authority over financial reporting and client relationships. Jonathan received recognition as Innovator of the Year from Colorado Business Magazine for his leadership in growing Nexus Tech's revenue and market share. The irony was devastating. The criminals were being rewarded and celebrated while their victim was folding sweaters at a department store. Marcus was now earning approximately $120,000 per year, plus bonuses based on the fraudulent financial performance he had engineered. Jonathan's consulting company was expanding into new markets, presumably to identify additional targets for their criminal enterprises. In late January, I learned that Nexus Tech's stock price had increased by 47% based on quarterly earnings reports that included the manipulated projections I had originally reported to Jonathan. Investors were celebrating the company's apparent success, unaware that their profits were built on systematic fraud and stolen intellectual property. The financial media praised Jonathan's strategic vision and Marcus's operational excellence. Meanwhile, I was earning approximately $800 per month after taxes living in my childhood bedroom and watching my professional skills deteriorate through lack of use. My student loan payments were in forbearance, but interest was accruing on the debt I had incurred to earn a degree that seemed increasingly worthless. The psychological impact was severe. I struggled with depression, anxiety, and a pervasive sense that justice was impossible in a system designed to protect wealthy criminals at the expense of honest employees. I began questioning whether I had made the right choice in reporting the misconduct, wondering if I should have kept quiet and looked for another job instead of trying to fight corruption. February brought unexpected contact from Emma Rodriguez, Jonathan's executive assistant. Emma called my parents' house on a Tuesday evening, speaking quietly and nervously about sensitive information she wanted to share. She explained that she had obtained my contact information through a mutual friend and wanted to meet in person to discuss Jonathan's criminal activities. "I can't talk on the phone because Jonathan monitors all office communications, and I'm afraid he might be tracking my personal devices too," Emma said. "But I have information that could help your case, and I think we can work together to expose what's really happening at the company." We arranged to meet the following weekend at a small restaurant in Columbus, approximately halfway between Dayton and Emma's location near Cleveland. Emma was 26 years old, a recent graduate of Case Western Reserve University, who had been working as Jonathan's assistant for 18 months. She was intelligent, professional, and clearly frightened by what she had discovered about her employer. "Jonathan has been sexually harassing me since my second week on the job," Emma explained over coffee in a quiet corner booth. "He makes inappropriate comments about my appearance, touches me without permission, and has made it clear that my job security depends on keeping him happy in ways that have nothing to do with professional performance." Emma had been documenting the harassment using a digital recorder app on her smartphone, creating an extensive archive of audio evidence showing Jonathan's illegal behavior. The recordings also captured his conversations with Marcus about their financial fraud schemes, including detailed discussions of how they had framed me for misconduct and destroyed my career through systematic character assassination. I have recordings of Jonathan bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the regulatory investigations and pressure government officials to delay or dismiss your complaints, Emma said. He talks about paying lawyers to spread false information about you and how satisfying it was to watch you lose everything for trying to interfere with their operations. The recordings were devastating evidence of criminal conspiracy, investor fraud, sexual harassment, and employee retaliation. Emma had captured over 40 hours of incriminating conversations during business meetings, phone calls, and private discussions in Jonathan's office. The audio quality was clear, and the conversations were detailed enough to support criminal prosecutions for multiple felony charges. "Why are you willing to risk your job to help me?" I asked. "You could face the same retaliation I experienced, or even worse consequences given what you know about their criminal activities." Emma's response revealed the depth of trauma she had experienced working for Jonathan. She described feeling trapped in an abusive work environment where her financial security depended on tolerating illegal behavior from someone with the power to destroy her career just as thoroughly as they had destroyed mine. "I can't keep enabling their crimes by staying silent, and I can't live with the knowledge that other people are being victimized while I do nothing to stop it," she said. Jonathan is planning to liquidate the company's assets and disappear to Costa Rica within 30 days. He's already transferred millions to offshore accounts and purchased property where he can't be extradited. If we don't act immediately, he's going to escape with all the stolen money while leaving Marcus to face prosecution alone. Emma's revelation changed everything. Jonathan wasn't planning to continue the fraud indefinitely. He was preparing to execute an exit strategy that would allow him to disappear with the profits while abandoning his accomplices and victims. Marcus was being set up as the fall guy who would face criminal charges while Jonathan enjoyed his stolen wealth in a tropical paradise. The timeline meant we had less than 1 month to expose the criminal enterprise and prevent Jonathan's escape. Emma was willing to partner with me, but we needed professional help from investigators and attorneys who weren't influenced by Jonathan's connections within the local legal and regulatory community. That night, for the first time in months, I felt hope returning. I wasn't a failed employee whose career had been justifiably destroyed for poor performance. I was the victim of an organized criminal conspiracy, and now I had an ally with evidence that could bring down the entire operation. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning, and this time I wouldn't be fighting alone. Emma and I spent the next 2 weeks developing a comprehensive strategy to expose Jonathan and Marcus while protecting ourselves from retaliation. Emma continued working normally at Nexus Tech, secretly recording conversations and gathering additional evidence while I researched investigative journalists and federal law enforcement agencies that specialized in corporate fraud cases. Emma's position as Jonathan's executive assistant provided extraordinary access to incriminating information. She had recorded Jonathan discussing plans to transfer an additional $4.7 million to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She captured conversations where he bragged about bribing a Colorado state senator to influence regulatory oversight and boasted about destroying the careers of 6 different whistleblowers over the past decade. "Jonathan thinks I'm completely loyal because I've tolerated his harassment without complaining to human resources," Emma explained during one of our clandestine meetings. "He discusses his criminal activities openly in front of me because he assumes I'm too afraid and financially dependent to betray him." We began researching Jonathan and Marcus's previous victims to build a comprehensive case showing their pattern of criminal behavior across multiple companies and states. Janet Coleman connected us with former employees from Innovative Solutions Group, Data Flow Systems, and Tech Advance Corporation, who had suspected fraud but lacked sufficient evidence to pursue legal action. The scope of their criminal enterprise was staggering. Over 12 years, Jonathan and Marcus had systematically defrauded investors of approximately $15 million while destroying the competitive advantages of numerous technology companies through corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. Their victims included not only investors and competing companies, but also hundreds of employees who lost their jobs when companies failed due to stolen trade secrets and manipulated financial performance. David Martinez, a former programmer at Tech Advance Corporation, provided particularly damaging testimony about how Jonathan and Marcus had stolen proprietary software code worth millions of dollars in development costs. The theft had bankrupted Tech Advance and eliminated competition in the small business accounting software market, allowing Jonathan's clients to dominate the sector through unfair advantages. They didn't just steal our code. They destroyed our ability to compete by giving our innovations to larger companies with superior marketing resources, David explained. Hundreds of people lost their jobs, and investors lost everything, while Jonathan collected consulting fees for helping our competitors crush us. Emma's recordings confirmed that Jonathan and Marcus were planning to execute the same exit strategy they had used at their previous companies. Once they had extracted maximum value from Nexus Tech through fraud and theft, they would arrange for the company's collapse while transferring stolen assets to offshore accounts beyond the reach of American law enforcement. Marcus doesn't realize that Jonathan is planning to abandon him, Emma revealed after recording a particularly incriminating conversation. Jonathan talks about Marcus as a useful tool who has outlived his purpose. He's documented evidence that will make Marcus look like the mastermind while portraying himself as a naive consultant who was deceived by a sophisticated fraudster. We realized that time was running short. Jonathan had scheduled a business trip to Costa Rica for March 15th, ostensibly to explore expansion opportunities in Central American markets. Emma had seen flight confirmations and property documents suggesting that this trip was actually the beginning of his permanent relocation to avoid prosecution. I contacted investigative journalist David Chen from the Wall Street Chronicle, who had written extensively about corporate fraud and government corruption. David was immediately interested in our story because it demonstrated how sophisticated criminal enterprises exploit regulatory weaknesses and political connections to avoid accountability. Your case represents a perfect storm of corporate fraud, investor deception, employee retaliation, and regulatory capture, David said during our initial phone interview. If we can present compelling evidence quickly enough to prevent Jonathan's escape, this could become a landmark case that exposes systematic problems with corporate oversight and whistleblower protection. David agreed to work with us on condition that Emma provide additional audio evidence showing Jonathan discussing his exit strategy and offshore asset transfers. He also wanted documentation of the political connections and legal relationships that had protected Jonathan from previous investigations. Emma rose to the challenge brilliantly. Over the next week, she recorded Jonathan making phone calls to his Costa Rican attorney discussing property transfers and residency requirements. She captured him instructing his financial advisor to liquidate remaining domestic investments and transfer proceeds to offshore accounts. Most damaging of all, she recorded Jonathan laughing about how he had manipulated Colorado regulatory officials and bragging about his ability to destroy employees who threatened his operations. The best part about the Thompson situation was watching her realize that all her evidence and ethical principles were completely worthless, Jonathan said in one recording. She actually believed the system would protect her for doing the right thing. It was almost educational to show her how the real world works for people who don't have connections and resources. The audio evidence was emotionally devastating, but legally invaluable. Jonathan had clearly articulated his criminal intent, described his methods for avoiding prosecution, and explicitly admitted to retaliating against me for reporting his crimes. The recordings provided prosecutors with direct evidence of conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. David Chen scheduled publication of his exposé for March 10th, giving law enforcement 5 days to arrest Jonathan before his planned departure for Costa Rica. We provided copies of all evidence to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division, and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. Emma and I also collaborated on a comprehensive victim impact statement describing how Jonathan's crimes had affected current and former employees, investors, and competing companies. We documented the personal costs of his retaliation strategy, including my financial devastation, career destruction, and psychological trauma. We estimated that Jonathan's criminal enterprise had caused over $50 million in total economic damage, when including lost jobs, bankrupted companies, and investor losses. The week before publication was terrifying for both Emma and me. We knew that Jonathan would respond violently once he realized the scope of our evidence and the threat to his escape plans. Emma continued working at Nexus Tech, maintaining her normal routine while secretly preparing for the aftermath of our revelations. I returned to Colorado to work with David Chen on final preparations for publication and to be available for immediate follow-up interviews with law enforcement agencies. My parents were worried about my safety, but they understood that this was my opportunity to achieve justice and prevent Jonathan from victimizing other people. "Freddie, I'm proud of you for not giving up when everything seemed hopeless," my father said as he drove me to the airport. "Sometimes doing the right thing takes longer than we expect, but it's still worth doing even when the personal cost is high." On March 9th, David Chen called to confirm that his editors had approved the story and that publication was scheduled for 6 a.m. the following morning. Federal agents were prepared to execute arrest warrants and search warrants simultaneously with the article's release to prevent evidence destruction and suspect flight. "Tomorrow is going to change everything," David said. "Jonathan's empire is about to collapse, and your courage made it possible." That night I couldn't sleep. After 15 months of professional destruction, financial devastation, and psychological trauma, justice was finally within reach. Jonathan and Marcus would face the consequences of their criminal actions, their victims would be vindicated, and future employees would be protected from similar retaliation. I thought about all the people who had suffered because of Jonathan's crimes, and all the victims who would be spared because Emma and I had found the courage to fight back. The personal cost had been enormous, but the outcome would justify everything we had endured. The empire built on fraud, theft, and corruption was about to crumble, and I would be there to watch it fall. March 10th began at 4:30 a.m. with a phone call from David Chen confirming that the Wall Street Chronicle expose was live on their website and scheduled for front-page coverage in the print edition. The article, titled "Colorado Tech Executives Accused of Massive Fraud and Retaliation Scheme," detailed Jonathan and Marcus's criminal enterprise with devastating precision. David had structured the story to maximize impact and credibility. The article opened with Emma's audio recordings of Jonathan bragging about destroying my career and discussing his offshore asset transfers. It included financial documentation showing systematic investor fraud testimonies from multiple victims across different companies and expert analysis of the regulatory failures that had enabled their crimes to continue for over a decade. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By 6 a.m., Colorado Attorney General Michael Rodriguez had announced criminal charges against Jonathan Bradley and Marcus Stevens for conspiracy, securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. FBI agents simultaneously executed search warrants at Nexus Tech headquarters, Jonathan's consulting offices, and both suspects' personal residences. Emma called me from the parking lot outside Nexus Tech, where she was watching FBI agents carry boxes of evidence from the building. "Freddie, you should see this. There are 8 federal agents inside, and they're seizing everything. Jonathan's office is completely emptied, and Marcus is being questioned in the conference room." The FBI had coordinated the raids perfectly. While agents were searching Nexus Tech, another team arrested Jonathan at his Denver home as he was loading suitcases into his Range Rover. He was apparently planning to leave for the airport 3 hours earlier than his scheduled flight, but federal surveillance had anticipated his attempt to flee. Marcus was taken into custody at the office, completely shocked by the sudden appearance of federal agents and the revelation of his business partner's escape plans. According to Emma's eyewitness account, Marcus kept insisting that he was just following Jonathan's instructions and had no knowledge of any criminal activities. Marcus looked absolutely devastated when the agents showed him Jonathan's recorded conversations about setting him up as the fall guy, Emma reported. "I think he genuinely believed that Jonathan considered him a trusted partner rather than a disposable accomplice." By noon, the story had been picked up by CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, and every major Colorado news outlet. The scandal was particularly explosive because Jonathan had been a prominent figure in the state's business community, serving on nonprofit boards and receiving recognition for his contributions to economic development. Colorado Governor Patricia Mills announced that the state would conduct a comprehensive review of regulatory oversight procedures to determine how such extensive criminal activities had avoided detection for so long. She specifically criticized the agencies that had delayed or dismissed my original complaints, promising accountability for officials who had failed to protect whistleblowers. "When honest employees report corporate misconduct, our government has a responsibility to investigate thoroughly and protect them from retaliation," Governor Mills said during an afternoon press conference. "The failures in this case are unacceptable, and we will implement reforms to prevent future victims from experiencing similar injustices." The Securities and Exchange Commission announced that it was freezing all Nexus Tech assets and launching a comprehensive investigation into the company's financial statements, investor communications, and business relationships. The agency estimated that investors had been defrauded of approximately $12 million through manipulated earnings reports and false revenue projections. Emma had submitted her resignation effective immediately, citing the hostile work environment and her unwillingness to continue enabling criminal activities. She was immediately contacted by the FBI's Victim Services Coordinator, who arranged for protective measures and counseling support to help her cope with the trauma of workplace harassment and the stress of serving as a key witness in major federal prosecutions. The impact on Nexus Tech was catastrophic and immediate. The company's stock price fell 86% in a single trading day as investors fled amid revelations of systematic fraud and criminal leadership. Major clients canceled contracts, and the company's primary bank froze all accounts pending the outcome of federal investigations. By evening, Nexus Tech had announced that it was suspending all operations indefinitely and laying off its entire workforce of 47 employees. The company's board of directors issued a statement expressing shock at the criminal allegations and promising full cooperation with law enforcement investigations. "We were completely unaware of the illegal activities described in today's news reports," the board statement said. "We are committed to ensuring that all victims receive appropriate compensation and that responsible parties face full accountability for their actions." The personal satisfaction of watching Jonathan and Marcus's empire collapse was profound but complicated. While I felt vindicated and relieved that justice was finally being served, I also recognized that dozens of innocent employees were losing their jobs because of their employer's criminal activities. The receptionists, programmers, and analysts who had worked honestly for Nexus Tech were now unemployed through no fault of their own. Sarah Martinez called that evening to thank me for exposing the truth and to update me on the chaos at the office. "Freddie, everyone knows now that your termination was retaliation for reporting real crimes. People are angry that management lied to us and angry that we didn't do more to support you when it happened." Sarah reported that several former colleagues wanted to provide statements supporting my wrongful termination claims and contradicting the false performance issues that had been used to justify my firing. The fabricated documentation was now clearly exposed as part of the criminal conspiracy, vindicating my claims of retaliation and character assassination. That night, I received an unexpected phone call that would change my life trajectory completely. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division was calling to discuss my potential role in their ongoing investigation and to present an extraordinary opportunity. "Miss Thompson, your original documentation and analysis were so thorough and insightful that they became the foundation for our entire investigation," Agent Walsh explained. "Your financial expertise and understanding of corporate fraud schemes make you an ideal candidate for a position with our Economic Crimes Unit." The FBI was offering me a position as a federal financial crimes analyst based in Denver with a starting salary of $68,000 plus federal benefits. The job would involve investigating corporate fraud, money laundering, and financial crimes similar to those I had uncovered at Nexus Tech. "We need people with your integrity and analytical skills to help protect other potential victims from experiencing what you went through," Agent Walsh said. "Your personal experience with corporate retaliation gives you unique insight into how these criminal enterprises operate and how they try to silence honest employees." The irony was beautiful and profound. My willingness to report corporate misconduct had destroyed my original career, but created opportunities for a more meaningful and impactful profession. The evidence I had gathered 18 months earlier was now being used to dismantle criminal enterprises throughout the region and to prosecute white-collar criminals who had operated with impunity for too long. I accepted the FBI position immediately, knowing that my painful journey had prepared me for work that could prevent other employees from facing similar retaliation and help bring justice to victims of corporate fraud. The personal cost of fighting corruption had been enormous, but the outcome exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Jonathan and Marcus were denied bail and remained in federal custody, pending trial, facing potential sentences of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Their assets were frozen, their criminal enterprise was destroyed, and their victims finally had hope for justice and financial recovery. The empire built on fraud and corruption had crumbled completely, and I had played a crucial role in bringing it down. 2 years later, I sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, watching Jonathan Bradley and Marcus Stevens receive their sentences for conspiracy, securities fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The courtroom was packed with former employees, defrauded investors, and victims from their previous companies who had traveled from across the country to witness justice being served. Jonathan received 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge specifically noted the extensive premeditation, the callous disregard for victims, and the systematic abuse of trust that characterized the defendant's criminal enterprise. Jonathan showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence and his recorded confessions. Marcus received 12 years after cooperating with federal prosecutors and providing testimony that helped convict 3 additional accomplices in their criminal network. His cooperation had been crucial in recovering millions of dollars in stolen assets and identifying victims across multiple states. The defendants operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that destroyed lives, bankrupted companies, and undermined public confidence in our financial markets, Judge Patricia Williams said during sentencing. These sentences reflect the seriousness of their crimes and the need to deter others who might consider similar schemes. The courtroom erupted in applause when the sentences were announced. I looked around at the faces of people whose lives had been damaged by Jonathan and Marcus's crimes, and I felt a profound sense of closure and vindication. Justice had taken longer than anyone expected, but it had finally arrived. Emma Rodriguez sat beside me now, working as a victim advocate for the Colorado Attorney General's office. She had found her calling, helping other employees report workplace crimes safely and effectively. Her experience surviving harassment and retaliation had given her unique insights into supporting victims through the complex process of exposing corporate misconduct. "Freddie, none of this would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless," Emma said as we left the courthouse. "You saved so many future victims by refusing to let them destroy you." My work with the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit had been extraordinarily fulfilling. Over the past 2 years, I had helped investigate and prosecute dozens of corporate fraud cases, recovering over $43 million for victims and preventing countless additional crimes through deterrent prosecutions. My specialization in financial analysis and corporate fraud schemes had made me one of the unit's most effective investigators. I had developed expertise in tracking offshore asset transfers, analyzing complex financial statements for evidence of manipulation, and identifying patterns that revealed systematic criminal activities. The personal growth and professional satisfaction exceeded anything I had experienced in my previous career. Every case involved protecting victims and holding criminals accountable, work that felt meaningful and important in ways that my original financial analyst position had never achieved. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter that brought my journey full circle. A young financial analyst named Jessica Parker had read about my case in David Chen's follow-up articles about corporate whistleblowing. She was writing to thank me for inspiring her to report fraud at her own company. "Miss Thompson, your story gave me the courage to expose systematic embezzlement at my workplace," Jessica wrote. "When I faced retaliation and termination, I knew from your experience that justice was possible if I didn't give up fighting. The FBI investigation led to criminal charges against 3 executives, and $15 million was recovered for pension fund victims." Jessica's letter made me realize that my painful experience had created ripple effects far beyond my own case. By sharing my story publicly and refusing to be silenced by retaliation, I had encouraged other employees to report corporate crimes and seek justice for themselves and their colleagues. David Chen had written several follow-up articles about corporate whistleblowing and regulatory reform, using my case as an example of both systematic failures and ultimate redemption. His reporting had contributed to legislative changes that strengthened whistleblower protections and improved oversight of regulatory agencies. The Nexus Tech Building now housed a community nonprofit organization that provided job training and placement services for displaced workers. The irony was fitting the location where crimes had been planned and cover-ups orchestrated was now helping honest people rebuild their lives and find meaningful employment. My relationship with my parents had deepened through our shared experience of resilience and recovery. My father often said that watching me fight for justice had reinforced his faith in the importance of standing up for principles, even when the personal cost was high. "Freddie, you showed me that integrity isn't about immediate rewards," he said during a recent visit. "It's about becoming the person you need to be when the moment for real change arrives." My mother had become involved with organizations supporting workplace harassment victims, drawing on her nursing background and our family's experience to help other people navigate trauma and recovery. She often said that my journey had taught her new ways to help people heal from systematic injustice. The financial recovery had exceeded expectations. The asset forfeiture from Jonathan and Marcus's criminal enterprise generated a victim compensation fund that provided restitution for damaged careers, lost wages, and other economic harm. I received $68,000 in compensation, enough to pay off my student loans and establish an emergency fund for future security. More importantly, my federal position provided excellent salary and benefits, job security, and opportunities for professional advancement within an organization whose mission aligned with my values. I was no longer worried about my financial stability or career prospects. Standing in my Denver apartment, 18 months after joining the FBI, I reflected on the journey from discovering Marcus's crimes to watching both perpetrators sentenced to federal prison. The path had been longer and more difficult than I ever imagined, but the outcome justified every sacrifice and struggle. The lesson was profound and clear: standing up for truth, even when the system initially fails you, plants seeds that eventually grow into justice. Integrity isn't about immediate rewards or easy victories. It's about becoming the person you need to be when the moment for real change arrives, and maintaining your principles even when the personal cost seems overwhelming. That evening, I received another letter from a corporate employee who had been inspired by my story to report financial crimes at her company. Reading her message, I realized that my painful journey wasn't just about achieving personal justice. It was about protecting future victims and changing corporate culture, one courageous action at a time. The rotten empire that had seemed invincible 18 months ago had collapsed completely. Justice had prevailed, victims had been vindicated, and the system had ultimately worked for people willing to fight long enough and courageously enough to make it work properly. I thought about all the employees who might now feel safer reporting corporate crimes because they knew that persistence and courage could overcome even sophisticated retaliation schemes. I thought about the investors whose money was protected because criminals faced real consequences for fraud. I thought about the honest companies that could now compete fairly because systematic cheaters had been removed from the marketplace. My story had become bigger than my personal experience. It had become a testament to the power of integrity, the importance of persistence, and the possibility that individual courage can create systematic change when supported by allies' evidence and unwavering commitment to truth. Have you ever witnessed injustice at your workplace and wondered whether speaking up would be worth the personal risk? Have you seen situations where doing the right thing seemed impossible because the people in power were protecting wrongdoers? I'd love to hear your thoughts about workplace integrity and standing up for what's right, even when the cost seems too high. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that justice is possible even when it takes longer than we expect and costs more than we anticipated. Sometimes the most important victories come after the most difficult struggles, and the courage to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless can literally change the world. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of persistence and integrity. Together we can create a world where honest people are protected and criminals face real consequences for their actions.